Hi there. I'm Audrey, and I'm 29 years old. Just last week, I was scrolling through our family group chat, reading all the excited messages about Thanksgiving dinner preparations. Mom was coordinating who would bring what, and everyone seemed so eager to gather together like we do every year. I remember feeling this warm sense of belonging, thinking about how lucky I was to have such a close-knit family. But sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who can hurt us deepest. Before we dive into what happened that completely shattered my world, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy real-life stories that matter. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this one, because what my mother did next changed everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. Growing up in suburban Denver, Colorado, I always thought I had the perfect family story. Well, maybe not perfect, but close enough. My father Tom died when I was 12 in a terrible construction accident, and it absolutely devastated our little world. He was this gentle, hard-working man who used to take me fishing every Saturday morning and taught me how to change a tire when I turned 16, even though he wasn't around to see it happen. 2 years after Dad passed, my mother Sandra, who was 55, now married David, a kind man who was 58, and worked in insurance. I was 14 then, and honestly, I was happy for her. She deserved love and stability after everything we'd been through. David brought his own warmth to our family, and he never tried to replace my father, which I appreciated more than I could express. Soon enough, our family expanded. Marcus came first when I was 16, this sweet little boy who looked exactly like David with his bright blue eyes and sandy hair. Then came the twin girls Emma and Grace when I turned 19 and was starting college. They were David's pride and joy, these beautiful daughters with Sandra's dark hair and David's gentle nature. I'll be honest, there were moments over the years when I felt slightly different, like I was observing family life from a step back rather than being right in the center of it. But I always attributed that to being the oldest, the responsible one who helped with homework, drove everyone to soccer practice, and mediated sibling arguments. Marcus was 22 now and struggling to find his footing after college. I'd spent countless evenings helping him polish his resume and practice interview skills. Emma and Grace, both 19 and in their sophomore year, were constantly coming to me with boy drama and friendship issues. I loved being the big sister they could trust with their secrets. My grandmother Rose, Dad's mother, had always been my anchor after he died. She lived just 30 minutes away, and we'd have coffee every Sunday sharing stories about Dad and looking through old photo albums. When she passed away 6 months ago, it felt like losing him all over again. But even in my grief, I was surrounded by family support. These days, I worked as a marketing coordinator for a small tech company downtown. Nothing fancy, but I loved the creativity, and the steady paycheck let me afford my cozy one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. I'd been dating Jake, a 31-year-old accountant, for about 8 months. He was patient, funny, and genuinely cared about my sometimes chaotic family dynamics. The Thanksgiving planning had started early this year, with Sandra creating elaborate spreadsheets and group chats. I was excited to contribute my grandmother's famous pumpkin pie recipe, something I'd been perfecting since she taught me last Christmas. During our phone call about the menu, Sandra seemed genuinely pleased with my dessert choice. Looking back now, I realized there were subtle signs I'd been rationalizing away for years. When Marcus needed money for textbooks, Sandra and David never hesitated. When I asked for help with my car repair last spring, there was always some reason why it wasn't the right time. When Emma and Grace wanted expensive formal dresses for winter formal, they got them immediately. When I mentioned wanting to take a photography class, Sandra suggested I wait until I was more financially stable. But families aren't perfect, right? I convinced myself that being the oldest meant being more independent. I told myself that David naturally wanted to provide more for his biological children. I made excuses because I loved them and wanted to believe in the family we'd built together. The first crack in my perfect family illusion happened during what should have been a simple shopping trip. Sandra had suggested we all go to Whole Foods together to pick up ingredients for Thanksgiving dinner. It was supposed to be fun, one of those chaotic family outings where everyone has opinions about cranberry sauce and argues over organic versus regular turkey. But from the moment we walked into the store, something felt off. Sandra kept avoiding eye contact with me, giving short, clipped responses to my suggestions about side dishes. When I pointed out that the organic sweet potatoes looked especially fresh, she just nodded distractedly and moved on. This was strange because normally she loved collaborating on meal planning. David seemed to sense the tension too. He kept trying to include me in conversations, asking my opinion about wine pairings and whether we needed more dinner rolls. But even his efforts felt forced, like he was overcompensating for Sandra's cold behavior. The strangest moment came when we were in the produce section. I was examining avocados for the salad when I heard Sandra whisper something to David. I couldn't make out the exact words, but I clearly heard her say, "telling her soon," while glancing directly at me. When I looked up, they both quickly looked away and started discussing Brussels sprouts with unnecessary intensity. Then came the double standard that I couldn't ignore anymore. Marcus wanted the premium organic turkey, the one that cost $60 more than the regular option. Sandra approved it without hesitation, praising his commitment to quality ingredients. 5 minutes later, when I suggested organic pumpkins for my pie, she questioned whether we really needed to spend the extra money on something that would just get mixed into filling anyway. The breaking point came at checkout when the cashier, a friendly older woman, looked at our group and smiled. "It's so nice to see families shopping together for the holidays," she said warmly. Then looking at David and me, she added, "Your stepdaughter seems to have inherited your thoughtful nature." The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra's face went pale, then flushed red. David shifted uncomfortably and mumbled something about the weather. Marcus and the twins suddenly became very interested in their phones. I felt like I was missing something crucial, but I couldn't figure out what. David tried to smooth things over by changing the subject to parking and traffic, but the damage was done. The ride home was awkward, filled with forced conversation about football games and Black Friday sales. Sandra stared out the window the entire time, responding to questions with single words or silence. That evening, I called Jake to decompress about the weird family dynamics. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what had bothered me, but something had definitely shifted. Jake, always the logical one, suggested maybe Sandra was just stressed about hosting a big dinner. That made sense, I supposed, but it didn't explain the strange whispered conversations or the sudden change in how she looked at me. Later that week, I was going through boxes of my grandmother's belongings, trying to decide what to keep and what to donate. Rose had been a meticulous keeper of memories, and I found myself getting lost in photo albums and letters. That's when I found them. Photographs of my parents that I'd never seen before. In these pictures, my father looked different somehow. Younger, yes, but also, I studied his features more carefully than I ever had before. His nose was straight and narrow, not broad like mine. His eyes were hazel, not the deep brown I saw in the mirror every day. His hair was light brown with red highlights, while mine was dark and thick. I'd always assumed I looked more like Sandra's side of the family, but looking at these photos made me question everything. When I brought them to Sandra the next day, asking about when they were taken and why I'd never seen them, her reaction was immediate and defensive. "Why are you digging through old pictures?" she snapped, barely glancing at them. "Your grandmother kept too much junk anyway. You should just donate most of it." But I caught something in her expression, a flash of what looked like fear or panic before she composed herself. She took the photos from my hands quickly, as if she didn't want me studying them too closely. "These are just random snapshots," she said dismissively. "Nothing important." But they felt important to me. They felt like missing pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was supposed to be solving. My curiosity about those photographs wouldn't let me rest. The weekend after our strange shopping trip, I decided to organize more of Grandmother Rose's papers systematically. She'd kept everything: old bills, Christmas cards, newspaper clippings, and boxes of correspondence that spanned decades. That's when I found my father's old address book tucked inside a cookbook. The leather cover was worn smooth, and the pages were filled with his careful handwriting. Most of the names and numbers were familiar: old coworkers, family friends, neighbors from our childhood home. But there were several entries that puzzled me, people I'd never heard my father mention. More intriguing were the letters I discovered in a manila envelope marked "Important Documents" in Rose's precise script. They were exchanges between my father and grandmother dated from the year before my birth through my early childhood. The tone was formal, careful, as if they were discussing something sensitive. One letter from my father to Rose particularly stood out. "I hope you understand why I need to handle this situation delicately," he'd written. "Sandra has made her position clear, and I have to respect her wishes about the timing. But when the truth comes out, and it will eventually, I want Audrey to know that none of this changes how I feel about her." Another letter, this one from Rose to my father, was even more cryptic. "You're a better man than most would be in this situation, Tommy. That little girl is lucky to have you as her father regardless of Sandra's secret. Just remember that love makes family, not biology." Sandra's secret. What secret could my mother have that would require such careful handling, and why were they talking about truth coming out and biology not making family? I spent the entire afternoon reading through every piece of correspondence, trying to piece together a story that made sense. The puzzle pieces were there, but they formed a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see clearly. Finally, I found a phone number for Tommy Martinez, one of the unfamiliar names in Dad's address book. After some internet searching, I discovered he'd been one of my father's closest friends and coworkers at the construction company. He now lived in Phoenix and ran his own contracting business. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call him. When I finally did, Tommy's voice was warm but surprised. "Audrey, Tom's daughter. Oh, honey, I haven't heard from your family since the funeral. How are you doing?" We chatted for a few minutes about life and work before I gathered my courage to ask about the letters I'd found. Tommy's tone immediately shifted, becoming more careful and hesitant. "Sweetheart, those are some old, complicated family matters. I'm not sure it's my place to—" "Please, Tommy," I interrupted. "I found these letters between my dad and grandmother, and they mention Sandra's secret and truth coming out. I just need to understand what they were talking about." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, Tommy sighed deeply. "Your father was a good man, Audrey. The best man I ever knew. He loved you more than life itself, and that never changed, not for one single day." "What are you trying to tell me?" "Your father. He had some doubts about your paternity. Sandra had been involved with someone else around the time you were conceived. Tom found out when you were about 2 years old, and it nearly destroyed him. Not because of you, never because of you, but because Sandra had lied to him for so long." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what he was telling me. "But he chose to raise you as his own," Tommy continued quickly. "He said it didn't matter whose biology you carried, you were his daughter in every way that counted. He made Sandra promise they'd tell you the truth when you were old enough to handle it, but then the accident happened." I was crying now, tears of confusion and grief, and something that might have been relief. My father had loved me unconditionally, even knowing I might not be his biological daughter. That knowledge was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Tommy, do you know who the other man was?" "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Your father never told me that part. He said Sandra refused to discuss it after they decided to stay together and raise you as a family." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall for hours. Jake came over with takeout and held me while I cried and told him everything. He listened without judgment, offering comfort and perspective when I was ready to hear it. The next morning, I researched DNA testing options. If I was going to confront Sandra about this, I wanted to be prepared for whatever truth emerged. But more than that, I wanted to honor my father's memory by finally bringing this family secret into the light. I had no idea that Sandra had been preparing for this conversation for nearly 30 years, and that her reaction would be far more devastating than anything I could have imagined. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I made the decision to have a private conversation with Sandra. I'd spent sleepless nights rehearsing what I would say, how I would approach the subject with compassion and understanding. After all, we were family and families work through difficult truths together. I chose a time when David was at work and Marcus and the twins were busy with their own activities. Sandra was in her kitchen already starting some early Thanksgiving prep work when I arrived with a box of my grandmother's letters and my father's address book. "Mom, we need to talk about something important," I said, setting the box on her granite countertop. Sandra glanced at the box and immediately tensed. "What's all this old stuff, Audrey? I thought you were donating Rose's things." "I found some letters between Dad and Grandma Rose. They mentioned some family secrets and situations that needed delicate handling. I also spoke with Tommy Martinez." The color drained from Sandra's face. She set down the wooden spoon she'd been using and turned to face me fully, her expression shifting from confusion to defensive anger in seconds. "You had no right to go digging through old correspondence or calling your father's friends," she said sharply. "Some things are better left buried." "But they're not buried, are they?" I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and gentle. "They're still affecting our family. Tommy told me about Dad's doubts regarding my paternity, about your involvement with someone else around the time I was conceived." Sandra's jaw clenched. Tommy Martinez should mind his own damn business. That was over 25 years ago. "So it's true then, you were with someone else when I was conceived?" "What does it matter now?" Sandra snapped, her voice rising. "Tom raised you, didn't he? You had a father who loved you. Why can't you just leave it alone?" "Because I have a right to know who I am, Mom. Because Dad apparently wanted me to know the truth when I was old enough to handle it. Because these secrets are affecting how our family treats each other." Sandra laughed bitterly. "Oh, so now you're going to blame family dynamics on ancient history. You've always been dramatic, Audrey. Always making everything about you." Her dismissive tone stung, but I pressed on. "I'm not being dramatic. I just want honesty about my biological father. Don't I deserve to know?" "No," Sandra said flatly. "You don't deserve to destroy this family's peace for your own selfish curiosity. Some secrets exist to protect people." "Protect who?" "Because it's not protecting me to live a lie. It's protecting Marcus and Emma and Grace from having their family torn apart by your identity crisis," Sandra shot back. "It's protecting David from having to deal with drama that happened before he was even part of our lives." I felt like she'd slapped me. "My identity crisis, Mom? This isn't about me being confused or dramatic. This is about you lying to Dad, lying to me, lying to our entire family for decades. Your father, Tom, knew exactly what he was getting into when he chose to raise you as his own," Sandra said coldly. "He made that choice because he was too weak to demand a paternity test and face the potential consequences." "Dad wasn't weak," I said, anger finally breaking through my careful composure. "Dad was loving and selfless. He chose to be my father because that's what good men do when they love their children unconditionally." "Well, congratulations on your sentimental view of the situation," Sandra replied sarcastically. "But I won't have you disrupting this family's stability with your need for validation from some biological stranger who's been absent for your entire life." "So there is someone you know who my biological father is?" Sandra's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Drop this subject, Audrey. I mean it. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences for this family. I won't let you destroy what we've built together." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind where I protect my real children from unnecessary drama and confusion. The kind where I prioritize the family members who belong here without question." The threat was clear, and it chilled me to the bone. But I couldn't back down, not when I was so close to understanding the truth that had shaped my entire existence. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Mom. I just want to know who I am." "You're exactly who you've always been," Sandra said with finality. "But if you insist on stirring up trouble, don't expect me to support you through the fallout." I left her house that afternoon with a heavy heart and a terrible sense of foreboding. When I told Jake about the conversation, he held me close and reminded me that seeking truth wasn't wrong even when others tried to make you feel guilty for it. I decided to attend Thanksgiving dinner anyway, hoping that family bonds and holiday spirit would soften Sandra's heart. I spent the entire evening before making my grandmother's pumpkin pie with extra care, putting love into every step of the process. I had no idea that Sandra had already decided to make Thanksgiving dinner the stage for the most brutal rejection I'd ever experienced. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect Colorado days that makes you grateful to live in such a beautiful place. I woke up early to put the finishing touches on my pumpkin pie, carefully arranging a decorative pattern of whipped cream around the edges, just like Grandma Rose had taught me. Jake helped me load the pie and a bouquet of fall flowers into the car, kissing me goodbye with a promise to pick me up if I needed an escape route. "Just text me if things get weird," he said, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be. I arrived at Sandra and David's house around 2 o'clock, fashionably on time for a 3 o'clock dinner. The familiar brick colonial looked welcoming with its festive autumn decorations, but something felt different the moment I walked through the front door. Sandra's greeting was cold and perfunctory. "You can put the pie in the kitchen," she said without looking at me directly, already turning away to fuss with centerpiece arrangements. David tried to compensate for his wife's chilliness with extra enthusiasm. "Audrey, that pie looks absolutely professional. Rose would be so proud of you carrying on her tradition." Marcus and the twins were in the living room watching football, and they seemed genuinely happy to see me. Emma jumped up to hug me, chattering about her new boyfriend and a drama class she was loving. Grace showed me photos from a recent hiking trip she'd taken with friends. Marcus asked for advice about a girl he'd met at his new job. For a few minutes, surrounded by my siblings' warmth, I allowed myself to hope that Sandra would let yesterday's argument stay in yesterday. The extended family began arriving around 2:30. Uncle Jerry and Aunt Patricia, Sandra's older siblings, came with their adult children. My cousins Lisa and Brian, both in their 20s with kids of their own. There were hugs and updates about jobs and relationships, the comfortable chaos of family gathering for the holidays. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see me. Aunt Patricia complimented my hair, Uncle Jerry asked about my job, and Cousin Lisa's 4-year-old son climbed into my lap during the football pregame show. This was the family love I remembered, the belonging I'd treasured my entire life. When we moved to the dining room, I noticed immediately that the place cards had been arranged differently than in previous years. Instead of my usual seat between Marcus and Emma, my place was at the far end of the table, almost like an afterthought squeezed in between the wall and David's chair. David led the pre-dinner prayer, and his words seemed carefully chosen. "We thank you, Lord, for bringing together our family on this day of gratitude. We're blessed by the true family bonds that unite us and the legitimate blessings you've bestowed upon this household." The emphasis on true and legitimate felt pointed, but I tried to dismiss it as coincidence. Surely David wouldn't be part of whatever Sandra was planning. During the appetizer course, conversation flowed normally. Uncle Jerry told stories about his latest fishing trip, Aunt Patricia shared updates about her garden club, and the cousins caught everyone up on their children's activities. I began to relax, thinking maybe I'd been overthinking Sandra's earlier coldness. Then Aunt Patricia, sweet and well-meaning as always, made an innocent observation that set everything in motion. "You know, I was looking at family photos earlier, and it's so interesting how genetics work," she said, gesturing around the table with her wine glass. "Marcus looks exactly like David did at his age, and the twins are perfect combinations of both Sandra and David's features. But Audrey, you really don't resemble anyone on Sandra's side of the family, do you?" The table went quiet. Not the comfortable pause of people thinking, but the sharp silence of everyone suddenly paying attention to something they wish they could ignore. "I mean, you're beautiful, honey," Aunt Patricia continued, oblivious to the tension she'd created. "You just have such unique features compared to the rest of us. You must take after Tom's side more." Sandra's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down with unnecessary force. "Actually, Patricia, there's something everyone should know about that." My stomach dropped. David reached across the table as if to stop his wife, but Sandra was already beyond anyone's control. "Audrey doesn't really belong to this family. Sandra announced with deliberate clarity. She's not even Tom's biological daughter. She's illegitimate. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt every pair of eyes at the table turn toward me, saw the shock and confusion on my relatives' faces, heard someone's sharp intake of breath. "Sandra," Uncle Jerry said sharply. "What the hell are you talking about?" But Sandra wasn't finished. Years of kept secrets and recent arguments had built up into this moment of cruel revelation. "I had an affair 29 years ago." She continued, her voice getting louder and more vindictive. "Tom suspected Audrey wasn't his, but he was too much of a coward to demand a paternity test. So we all pretended she was legitimate family, but I'm tired of pretending." The extended family sat in stunned silence. Cousin Lisa's mouth was actually hanging open. Brian had stopped chewing mid-bite. Uncle Jerry's face was turning red with either embarrassment or anger. "I won't continue this charade anymore," Sandra declared, looking directly at me with eyes full of cold determination. "This dinner is for legitimate family members only. Audrey, I think you should leave." The devastation was complete in public. In front of aunts, uncles, cousins, and children who'd known and loved me my entire life, Sandra had stripped away my place in the family with surgical precision. David finally found his voice. "Sandra, stop this right now. This is not how we handle family matters." "She's not family, David," Sandra shot back. "She's the result of my mistake, and I won't pretend otherwise anymore just to spare her feelings." Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. Emma was crying quietly, and Grace had covered her face with her hands. Uncle Jerry started to stand up, clearly intending to intervene, but I held up a hand to stop him. "It's okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I understand now." I stood up with as much dignity as I could manage, picking up my untouched pie from the sideboard. "Thank you all for 29 years of love. That meant everything to me, regardless of DNA." As I walked toward the door, I heard Aunt Patricia's voice behind me, shaking with outrage. "Sandra, you should be ashamed of yourself. That girl has been nothing but a blessing to this family." But Sandra had the last word. She can take her pie and her questions about paternity and find her real family. We're done pretending here. I made it to my car before the tears started driving home through a blur of grief and humiliation that felt like drowning while still breathing. The 3 days following Thanksgiving were the darkest of my adult life. I called in sick to work, turned off my phone, and retreated so completely that Jake had to use his spare key to check on me. He found me on my couch, still in the same clothes from Thursday, surrounded by tissues and empty ice cream containers. "Audrey, honey, you can't do this to yourself," he said gently, sitting beside me and pulling me into his arms. "What Sandra did was cruel and wrong, but it doesn't define who you are or what you're worth." But it felt like it did define me. For 29 years, I'd believed I belonged somewhere, that I had a place in the world that was mine by right. In one devastating dinner, Sandra had stripped that away and made it clear that my presence in the family had been nothing more than an obligation they'd finally grown tired of carrying. Jake stayed with me through those dark days, bringing soup I didn't eat, and holding me while I cried myself to sleep. On Sunday evening, he gently suggested something that initially terrified me, but ultimately became my path forward. "Maybe it's time to take that DNA test," he said quietly. "Not because Sandra was right to humiliate you, but because you deserve to know the whole truth about where you come from." The idea of potentially confirming Sandra's cruelest words made me feel sick, but Jake was right. I'd lived with questions and half-truths for too long. If I was going to rebuild my sense of self, I needed to start with facts. Monday morning, I ordered a DNA testing kit online. Tuesday, I submitted my sample. The waiting period was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks, but I paid for expedited processing. If I was going to face this truth, I wanted to face it quickly. While waiting for results, something unexpected happened. My phone started ringing with calls from family members who'd witnessed Sandra's Thanksgiving cruelty. Uncle Jerry called first, his voice tight with anger. "I've never been so ashamed of my sister in my life," he said. Whatever mistakes were made 30 years ago, there was no excuse for what she did to you in front of the whole family. Aunt Patricia called, crying, apologizing for inadvertently triggering Sandra's outburst. I had no idea about any of this family drama, she sobbed. But even if everything Sandra said was true, you're still our family sweetheart. You've been our family for 29 years. Cousin Lisa texted long messages about how disgusted she was with Sandra's behavior, how much she'd always admired me, how her children asked where Cousin Audrey had gone during dinner. Even Brian, who wasn't usually emotionally expressive, called to tell me that Sandra's actions didn't represent how the extended family felt about me. The most surprising call came from David on Wednesday evening. His voice was heavy with guilt and exhaustion. "Audrey, I owe you an enormous apology," he began. "I should have stopped Sandra before she could humiliate you like that. I should have stood up to her years ago when I started noticing how differently she treated you compared to Marcus and the twins." "David, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I've been a coward, and my cowardice allowed my wife to treat you unfairly for years, culminating in that horrible scene on Thanksgiving. You deserved better from me, from all of us." He went on to tell me that Sandra had been defensive and unrepentant since Thanksgiving, insisting she'd only told the truth and that everyone would get over it eventually. Marcus and the twins, however, were struggling with what their mother had done. "They love you, Audrey. They're horrified by how Sandra acted. Marcus has barely spoken to her since Thursday, and the twins have been crying on and off for days." The DNA results came back exactly 3 weeks after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. I opened them alone in my apartment, Jake holding my hand for moral support. Sandra had been right about the paternity. According to the genetic markers, Tom was not my biological father. But the test results revealed something Sandra either didn't know or had chosen not to share. They'd identified potential relatives on my biological father's side, including a possible half-sibling match. With trembling hands, I clicked through to the extended results and found a name, Michael Rodriguez, listed as a potential father with 97% probability. The system showed he'd also taken a DNA test, which meant he was searchable in their database. More research revealed that Michael Rodriguez was a 58-year-old architect living in San Diego. His professional website showed photos of a successful man with kind eyes and features that looked remarkably similar to mine. The same dark hair, the same nose shape, the same smile. It took me 2 days to work up the courage to use the DNA website's messaging system to contact him. I wrote and rewrote the message a dozen times before finally sending something simple and honest. "Hi, Michael. The DNA testing site indicates you might be my biological father. My name is Audrey. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Denver. I was born in 1994 to Sandra Martinez. If you're willing to talk, I'd love to learn more about this connection." He responded within 4 hours. "Audrey, I can't believe I'm writing this. I had a brief relationship with Sandra in 1993, but she told me she was moving back to Colorado to reconcile with her husband. I never knew she was pregnant. I've wondered about you for 29 years, hoping you were happy and loved, never dreaming I'd have the chance to know you. Could we arrange a phone call?" Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. Michael was warm, intelligent, and genuinely excited to learn about my life. He told me about his architecture firm, his love of hiking and photography, his regret that Sandra had never told him about my existence. "I would have wanted to be part of your life," he said earnestly. "I would never have abandoned my responsibility or my opportunity to know my daughter." As we talked, I learned that I'd inherited his love of design and his tendency to organize everything in color-coded systems. We shared similar humor and had both struggled with anxiety in our 20s. The biological connection was undeniable, but more importantly, there was genuine affection developing between us. Michael was planning to visit Denver during Christmas week, specifically to meet me in person. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt excited about something instead of just surviving each day. Meanwhile, the rest of my chosen family continued to rally around me. Marcus visited my apartment with tears in his eyes, apologizing for his mother's behavior, and affirming that I would always be his big sister regardless of DNA. Emma and Grace sent a joint letter expressing their love and horror at what Sandra had done. Even more surprisingly, several extended family members reached out to express their displeasure with Sandra and their continued love for me. I was invited to Uncle Jerry's house for Christmas Eve, to Aunt Patricia's New Year's party, and to Cousin Lisa's daughter's birthday party in January. The love and support from my chosen family was healing in ways I hadn't expected. But the best surprise was still to come in the form of a phone call that would change everything about how I understood forgiveness, family, and my own strength. Christmas week arrived with unexpected joy instead of the dread I'd been anticipating. Michael flew into Denver on December 22nd, and we met for coffee at a small cafe in Cherry Creek. The moment I saw him walking through the door, there was no question about our biological relationship. We had the same walk, the same way of tilting our heads when thinking, even the same habit of drumming our fingers when nervous. Our conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years instead of weeks. Michael brought photo albums showing his family history stories about my biological grandparents who'd passed away, and insights into personality traits I'd never understood about myself. He also brought genuine regret about missing my childhood and determination to build a real relationship now. "I want to be clear about something," he said over our second round of coffee. "I'm not trying to replace Tom's role in your life. From everything you've told me, he was an extraordinary father who loved you completely. I just want to add to your family, not subtract from what you already have." That evening, I hosted a small Christmas gathering at my apartment. Jake was there, of course, along with Michael, David, Marcus, Emma, and Grace. Uncle Jerry and Aunt Patricia came with their families, creating a warm, loving celebration that felt more genuine than any holiday I could remember. The contrast with Sandra's bitter Thanksgiving exclusion was stark and beautiful. Where she had used family dinner as a weapon to hurt and humiliate, I was using Christmas to heal and include. Where she had focused on legitimacy and biology, I was celebrating love and choice. David brought a heartfelt apology gift, a framed photo of my father Tom holding me as a baby, with an inscription that read, "Love makes family." Marcus contributed his famous homemade bread, and the twins made a playlist of songs that reminded them of our childhood together. Michael brought a small sculpture he'd made in his pottery class, something beautiful and unique that represented new beginnings. The evening was filled with laughter, storytelling, and the kind of comfortable family chaos that heals wounded hearts. Even better, several people mentioned how sorry they felt for Sandra spending Christmas alone while her family celebrated without her. "She's the one who's missing out," Aunt Patricia observed. "She chose bitterness over love, and look what it cost her." As winter progressed, my life began to stabilize in ways that surprised me. The crisis Sandra had created had forced me to examine what really mattered, and I discovered I was stronger and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. At work, my confidence had actually increased. No longer worried about family approval or walking on eggshells around Sandra's moods, I took on more challenging projects and received a promotion to senior marketing coordinator in February. My newfound independence and self-assurance impressed my supervisors and colleagues. Michael and I developed a genuine father-daughter relationship built on mutual respect and shared interests. He visited Denver monthly, and I planned a trip to San Diego for spring break. We texted regularly, shared articles about architecture and design, and discovered we both loved obscure documentary films about historical mysteries. Jake proposed on New Year's Eve, surrounded by our chosen family at Aunt Patricia's party. His proposal was simple and perfect. "Audrey, you've shown me what real strength looks like. You've taught me that family is about love and loyalty, not just biology. Will you marry me and let me be part of your beautiful, complicated, chosen family?" I said yes through happy tears, and the celebration that followed included everyone who mattered to me. David cried, Marcus gave Jake the traditional Big Brother warning speech, and the twins immediately started planning bachelorette party activities. Michael welcomed Jake warmly, and Uncle Jerry offered his backyard for the wedding reception. The wedding planning became a joyful family project. David offered to walk me down the aisle alongside Michael, honoring both my father figures. Marcus would serve as Jake's best man, while Emma and Grace would be my maids of honor. Even Aunt Patricia volunteered to make the wedding cake. But the most significant development was still to come in the form of a letter that arrived in March, 6 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. The envelope was addressed in Sandra's familiar handwriting, and I almost threw it away without opening it. Only Jake's gentle encouragement convinced me to read what she'd written. Audrey, the letter began. I owe you an apology that's 6 months overdue, and probably inadequate no matter how I phrase it. What I did to you at Thanksgiving was cruel, unnecessary, and wrong. I've lost the respect of my siblings, my husband, and my children because of my actions, and I deserve every bit of their disappointment. She went on to explain that she'd been carrying guilt and shame about her affair for 30 years, and seeing me pursue the truth had triggered her worst defensive instincts. She'd lashed out in the cruelest way possible because she was afraid of facing her own mistakes and their consequences. You deserved honesty delivered with love and privacy, she continued. Instead, I gave you cruelty delivered with public humiliation. I was protecting myself at the expense of hurting you, and that makes me a coward and a bad mother. The letter concluded with a request that surprised me. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. But I am asking for the chance to start over if you're ever willing. I want to try to be the mother you deserved all along, even if it's 29 years too late. I read the letter 3 times before showing it to Jake, then called Michael for his perspective. Both men encouraged me to consider reconciliation, but only on my own terms and timeline. Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook, Michael said thoughtfully. It's about freeing yourself from carrying their mistakes around in your heart. After weeks of consideration, I decided to write back. Not to absolve Sandra of responsibility for her actions, but to open a door for gradual healing if she was genuinely committed to change. My response was measured and clear. I appreciate your apology, and I believe you're sincere about regretting your actions. I'm willing to start with occasional coffee dates and see if we can build something healthier than what we had before. But I need you to understand that rebuilding trust will take time, and my forgiveness doesn't erase the consequences of what you did. Sandra's response came immediately. I understand completely, and I'm grateful for any chance you're willing to give me. I love you, and I should have said that on Thanksgiving instead of everything else I said. Our first coffee meeting in April was awkward but civil. Sandra looked older, more fragile somehow, and genuinely remorseful. We talked carefully about neutral topics, testing the waters of possible reconciliation. By summer, we'd progressed to occasional family dinners with David and the kids present as buffers. Sandra was clearly making an effort to treat me as an equal family member, asking about my opinions, including me in planning discussions, and showing genuine interest in my relationship with Michael. The healing process wasn't linear or simple, but it was real. At my wedding in September, Sandra sat in the 3rd row, not the place of honor she might once have expected, but present and supportive nonetheless. She'd earned her way back into my life through consistent actions and genuine change, not through demands or expectations. Looking back now, I realize that Sandra's cruel rejection had actually been a gift in disguise. It forced me to discover my own strength, build authentic relationships based on mutual respect, and create the kind of family I'd always wanted. One based on love and choice, rather than obligation and biology. I learned that being called illegitimate by someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally said nothing about my worth and everything about her character at that moment. I learned that real family shows up for you during your worst moments, not just your best ones. Most importantly, I learned that no one else has the power to determine where you belong in this world. That's a decision you make for yourself, surrounded by people who choose to love and support you, regardless of DNA history or past mistakes. Have you ever been rejected by someone you thought would always be there for you? How did you find the strength to rebuild and move forward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family forgiveness and finding where you belong. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's limitations. Thank you for letting me share this journey with you, and remember, you belong wherever you choose to build love, respect, and authentic connection. That's the only legitimacy that truly matters.